Good morning. This is Michael Bartlett in Santa Fe, New Mexico with deep dives with new perspectives. If you like what you see and hear, please like us, please subscribe, and please share with your friends. Hey, Merrylin, how are you doing today?
Well, Michael, I'm as best as can be, I guess. But, every now and then there's this kind of like anxiety moments of what this is from an astrologer. What does the future hold? And for me, that anxiety really comes from, the fact that the situations in the world that are really changing our lifestyles a great deal for many of us, um, is that they're collective patterns which depend on the movement of the collective to see where they will end. And so, it's I want to go back, like we had the Uranus Pluto square, and a couple years ago, but we're still actually in the waning parts of that energy where our structures are meant to change in ways that we definitely go in more ideal directions. And of course, who's to decide what's ideal? And that's the disturbing mess that we're in, because it could go one way or the other. We look at past transits of Uranus squaring the sun, and we've had them. They had, not the sun. Uranus squares the sun every year. That happens. The sun squares Uranus. The Uranus squaring Pluto is, we've had them, and I'm thinking of one that happened in the mid 1800s, and yet Jim Crow continued for the Black people, and that oppression continued. So it takes that whole concept of a critical mass to make things shift. And so consequently, as an astrologer, I'm not pessimistic, but I'm not optimistic. And of course, that realm takes me into a little bit of anxiety about how, I found myself this past week thinking, what can I do? What am I capable of doing physically and intellectually and emotionally to help get people out there to vote? Because these times are so dependent on what we as a mass choose to do with our lives. And, I think the most critical thing is climate change. And here we are in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where yesterday, did it hit the 90s yesterday? Or it was in the 80s for sure. I didn't
90s.
check it regularly. And tomorrow or today is supposed to be in the 60s, and tonight it might snow, and then we're going to go back. I mean, this is totally erratic, and it's happening all over the world. And it just brings to mind that aside from the abuse of people, and that's one of the topics that we really want to talk about in a larger umbrella today, but it also says, we're doing very little right at the moment, we in the United States at least, about climate change. And I mean, I was born in LA, and this weekend they hit 120 some degree. That sounds like Phoenix. I mean, this is crazy. Something's up. This is not normal. And I don't buy into, people will say, oh, well, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, the weather was like this. Well, I don't think it was quite as regular. I mean, we've seen, this has been a steady increase of significantly changing weather that is not conducive to human existence.
Yeah, it's, you know,
Like,
and the interesting thing is it's we're having more of those once in 100, once in a 500, once in 1,000 year periods happening all like next year to one another. I mean, California has some obscene like 7,000 acres burning or 700,000 acres burning because someone like sent up a pyrotechnic thing to say what type of child they were going to have, whether it was male or female. Really, is it that
oh,
important right now?
right,
That would be
right.
horrible. I mean, that's, and what an interesting thing, you know, because we're talking about these energies right now, you know, Mars is squaring, Mars in Aries is getting ready to retrograde in 2 days and is squaring all those planets, you know, all that stuff we've been dealing with, the Pluto and the Saturn and the Jupiter and Capricorn. And you know, here we have these conflagrations, we have these fires going on. I mean, there's been a high over the whole Western United States for so long. It's like I don't think I've ever, as long as I've been watching like weather maps and things, I don't think I've ever seen like such a prolonged period with something just, I mean, it's just like basically God put a like a big magnifying glass over that part of the United States, but it's not just the United States, it's happening in Europe, you know, parts of Europe, parts of China. I mean, it's really this whole band around, you know, just north of the equator, because those are the civilized countries in the world, right? And we're I hear you with the anxiety. I'm awake all day long, you know, dealing with things one moment to the next, and then when I go to sleep, I want to sleep, but it's like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I wake up and my mind starts, you know, thinking on these things, and it's like I think our collective soup is really full of anxiety. I mean, all of us who are astrologers, we know. I mean, we've known that this was going to be a challenging time, but like you said, all we know is kind of like the thematic, you know, as we call them, the archetypes, the thematic representations along a spectrum of how they're going to express during this time. Um, you know, can be any number of things. But the thing is, I think we didn't think we weren't. It, I don't think we realized we'd be getting hit from so many sides. You know, there's the environment, there's the political situation, there's, you know, what's going on with racism, there's what's going on with sexism, there's stuff that's going on with power, there's stuff going on with the developed countries taking advantage of the undeveloped countries, and you know, all the puppet governments. And I mean, it's just, it's like, and, you know, and then like, I don't know about you, but I recently read like I have enough stuff, you know, I have all these Virgo planets, so of course all I do is worry about things. You know, reading about these solar flares that happen once, you know, once in a while, that actually, because we're so now dependent electronically, you know, in the past they like knocked out all the telegraphs, you know, so if they did that to the telegraphs, which is a really rudimentary process, is sending information along a thing, ours is so ethereal, ours is all cloud-based now. You send an electric shock through that, I mean, we can be, you know, we can be in like an information blackout for a significant period of time. So, you know, not that there's anything else to worry about. And the fires, oh right, the fires.
We just need to be flexible,
And breathe,
flexible,
and
you
breathe.
know, and and let our instincts guide us. I think, you know,
Well,
it's
I
based
mean, the hard part
certain.
is a lot of people would say that they are acting from instinct, but I think instinct has a couple of different things. Instinct has a reaction nature that is based on something that's very, like, we don't really have a control over. And then instinct can have that way in which we have learned through time how to use it properly. You see it with musicians, you see it with dancers, you see it with anything that requires precision in the body, that kind of balancing of body, mind, and spirit all in the same thing. But it's a thing about being present within the moment and saying, oh, I want to run right now, but what I have to do is I have to go and help this person, or I need to, you know, whatever that thing is that we need to do from a higher standpoint that isn't just about saving our own hide. And I think that's the tipping point of what we're getting into right now.
I don't disagree with you. It's it's strange times. Anything can happen, and it wouldn't be surprising. I love my computer. I love the internet. I love my devices. I love what they're able to do. But I also know it's a grand experiment that we may not be able to extend. I think, you know, we don't really know the ultimate effects of all of it on ourselves. I've heard some people talk about them in dire words. But, you know, it's sort of like we've gotten too far into it. It's an experiment that, we may survive or we may not survive.
I don't know if
Um,
you heard about this AI robot named Sophia, who's for wisdom. And it's interesting because they had I was watching YouTube yesterday, and they had a topic on, they had her and Tony Robbins talking, and they were asking each other questions, and it was like, well, and it was very interesting because on one hand it has this ability to understand complex sentences and complex concepts, but on the other hand it's very simple, because it doesn't think and grow in the way that humans' minds build information, because it's a different, we're still trying to replicate that, I think. But what was interesting was like, well, what do you think about, oh, that's what it was. It went on to this next thing where they interviewed her on an English talk show. And, that typical fear-based talk show was like, well, what do you think? Like, do you think there's something in her that might eventually make it so she can turn on all the electronic objects in the world and they can come out and attack all of us humans, like right in front of her? And it was like this really interesting concept of like, oh my God, the wonderful gift about robots is they don't have to sit in a place of fear, but they're going to have to work in a place like how to deal with humans' fears. Right?
well, yeah,
We're going off on a
yeah.
whole different tangent, but I'm Aquarian, so
Well,
of
pic-
course, I'm thinking about.
science fiction writers have already come up with scenarios
Right.
about, the
Robot.
computer and the being
Yeah.
taking over, getting that extra leap. The one question is, can we really put intuition, instinct, hunches, all of that in? Can we program that into a robot?
It's interesting.
This goes to very fundamental questions about who we are and what we believe, and I believe we are created beings from some higher source. You can call it whatever you want or whatever, who has set this universe as we know it in motion, and that we are energy. Energy never goes away, that we will survive this kind of existence and have another kind of existence. I don't know exactly what that will look like. I mean, there are people that have had near-death experiences and have written about them, and they all sound absolutely wonderful. It's sort of like taking the fear out of death or extinction. But we, Jung even said, when you think of God as, or that concept of God as creator, God creates through us. We are continuing the process of creation. And what we human beings, up until this point in time, for us, there may be other time zones and parallel universes, etc. Who knows? I don't deny any of that. I don't know much about it, but I'm open. And but we seem, as a whole, as a human race, to have let our greed, those negative, like the seven deadly sins, I think, and greed is one of them. We've let those negative sins take over. That concept of which direction, and science fiction deals with that too. You've got the Borg and you've got the Klingons, and then you've got the guys on the Enterprise, and the good versus bad. Is there really such a thing, or is this something that we've made up and we haven't shaken off?
Well, it's interesting because when you think about it, like I think, like when I think of the 20th century, I think of the 20th century as being probably the longest period in some ways of time of of great abundance, security, and very that what that Cancer and Pluto and Cancer generation was able to kind of attain about creating like a chicken in every pot and this kind of safety, and there was enough food and you could get food throughout the year and everything. And now I think we're into a decline to transition into something else, because that isn't sustainable for all of us. It isn't. I think the 7 deadly sins and like even the 10 commandments are really about coming from a time when when there wasn't really enough of anything. There wasn't enough people to to have as to go out and have family members with, or to create a new family, or there wasn't enough resources or whatever, or stability enough to be able to live. And now we have all those things, and look what we've done with it. Like you said, then there's the 7 deadly sins, and maybe comes out of that having too much. We get slovenly, we get greedy, we become so me oriented, because we've kind of gotten to that tipping point away from the understanding of an integrated village, because it really does take a village. As I've talked many times, back in the past, there was a place for every single person. There was a place, for Tony the liar, and there was the, and Ginny the adulterer, and John the gigolo, and it's like everyone go, oh, well, they're just being themselves. And I think we've separated ourselves from these, intimate understanding of the archetypes. When people grew up back in the past, they understood about the Greek gods, they understood about what these archetypes operated, and they understood that they were, even the Bible, these are all metaphors of like, kind of right ways of living, but we have to take them in the context of when they were living and the ways of consciousness of that time. And now we're living in a very different time, but we're still those kind of base humans on certain levels too. We're still kind of operating from that kind of, oh my God, people are here to take things from me, or, the whole fake news thing, when you talk about belief and instinct, people are so removed from their understanding of themselves. I don't think we can trust people's instincts. When people are sitting on their front lawn and saying, I'm going to shoot you because you're not like me, there's something wrong with your instinct.
Well, yes, but you're definitely looking at people in the United States.
Yeah, I am.
I can't talk for the world at large. I would hope that there's a higher consciousness. No, I mean, unfortunately, and having been an educator in this country, I feel like we've failed immensely in our job to educate. I mean, that we're talking about people who have not even begun to develop themselves, to educate themselves, because education is way more than just left brain learning, all the
critical thinking, learning how to ask a question,
right. And considering what we're doing here, and what makes us happy and what makes us not happy, and the American culture has bought so much into what's fed on video. Here we are right now.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's the commercialism, the oh, let's have more, let's have more objects, let's have more things. When is enough enough?
Right.
And then there's this whole thing of not, the part that you bring up is the thing is that we're social beings, and yet that hasn't been developed very well. And that's a concern of these times with children not being in schools, because one of the things that schooling has done to a certain extent is socialized people. It's questionable to what extent. I can remember, back in the late 60s, early 70s and stuff, where in classrooms, teachers would set up a dynamic of, okay, all the blondes are people that are less than, just so that that you could have the experiences of being in a group that is downtrodden, that is enslaved, that doesn't. But to what extent that sort of education is going on today, I have no idea.
Well, it's kind of funny because we've been kind of touching on this subject, and you and I, when we talked about this originally kind of a topic, we thought about talking about migration. And it was interesting because when I started looking at the migration thing, what caught my mind more, because it's interesting, at least as far as the wall's concerned, we actually, Mexico actually started building it in 1918, believe it or not. And then it kind of went on, but I actually don't really want to focus on that as much as that the migration, the greatest US migration that happened was between 1916 and 1930, and then again 1940 and 1970, when 6 million blacks left the South. Because, when we're talking about this thing of acceptance, I mean, because they saw that, as you talked about earlier, these Jim Crow laws, these things like where there's this apparent acceptance of a new way of being, but a complete lack of integration, a complete lack of, or a complete defiance of the act on certain people. I mean, I remember I visited one of my partner's families back in Atlanta, back in the early 90s. Yeah, it was the early 90s. And, she knew I was from California, and she said, well, you know what the difference is? And she used that word. And I was just like, I was like, wow. And she said the difference between them here in the South and them in California. And I was like, well, first of all, we don't call people that. And second of all, no. And she says, well, here they know their place. And I was like, it was like this cold, sharp knife that went into my heart. I mean, I still feel it today. Like, I was like, and then walking in the streets and seeing, Black people stepping off the sidewalk because I'm on the sidewalk. And it's like, I had no, I didn't understand that. And it's like, so I can understand why, where there would be this mass migration. And so I started looking at the astrology of it. And it's like this very interesting, aspects of like Leo and Cancer and Taurus energies with the outer planets, so this, this kind of awakening, realizing, Pluto and Cancer in 1916, kind of realizing, what, this isn't our home, right? We need to be where our home is. We can't be in a place where, where we have to fear that ourselves and our children and our grandchildren are just going to be randomly picked up and lynched and shot, which, oh my God, that shit is still happening today. The only difference now is people are able to record it so that people, that hopefully this stuff will stop. But and then here we are in 2020, and we've got, the Capricorn energies across from Cancer saying, hey, you guys, it's time. Black Lives Matter. There is value to these people who have given, who are Americans, who give so much, who have done so much to build this country. And this is how they're still being treated. Like they're being treated like animals. I'm so happy, like I said last time, I'm so happy that famous Black people are starting to say like, hey, yeah, whenever we are in our cars, we have to be scared when we get pulled over, because if a cop doesn't know who we are, we could be shot, we could be killed, because we're just another Black person. It's when is this going to stop?
Well, that's part of the Black Lives Matter thing, and I don't like the term defund the police, but right. But the police forces need more training, especially in how to deal with different social interactions. There's obviously a need for some reform to go on in that area. And for people to think that, I don't think that people mean, oh, let's just wipe out the police force. We need a different kind of, in some places we have decent police forces, meaning they do know, or they are trained on how to deal with certain questionable situations. But obviously it's not universal, and it needs to be.
There, the term, they were called peace officers before. The understanding of mediation would be really important. The number of individuals they encounter, the gentleman who was, had mental behavioral health issues, but was on PCP. That needs to be kind of, it's never easy for anyone to be dealing with anyone who's on PCP. And if someone has, behavioral health issues on top of that or underlying that, that's, you don't know what you're going to be creating. Not that I'm rationalizing how it was handled or anything, but The truth is that police officers need to be trained how to handle people who have, because there's a lot of mental health issues out there. There are a lot of people, as we talked about earlier, the anxiety, people who have a lot of mental health issues typically are really very sensitive people who have not been supported, I feel, in proper ways of expression and understanding. Some of them, of course, everything's along the spectrum, and there's some people that are just really not able to interact with others and that. But generally, there's some level of cognition and some level of functioning that allows one to interact with one's environment on different levels. And so finding those right environments and supportive and safe environments is really crucial. And here we are talking about that cancer thing again. And so I don't know, like then I went back and I started looking at, well, when did slavery start happening? When did the African ships start coming over? And, I don't know, one thing that really excites me about astrology is we can see that, Daniel Fiverson likes to say, history doesn't, how does he say, it doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Yeah.
I like to see it as being like, life is really this ongoing river spiral in a sense. It's like you can never meet it in the same place, but you continue to meet these themes. And astrology shows us there's these thematic cycles that show up, throughout time, and we kind of revisit things. And it's like, okay, how are we doing on that? What are we doing? So, when I look up, first African slaves to the United States, it actually comes up as 1619. But, I say that in quotes because and I'll talk about that in a second, but it's interesting because it's Pluto in Taurus, Neptune in Libra, Uranus in Cancer, and Saturn in Gemini. And so it's this, this determinism that is kind of based on this, this power over others and this power of this ability to, to take others from their home. Uranus and Cancer, here's that Cancer theme again. But when I looked at more, that was really more what they said, that was when people started getting really declared as slaves. But in 1441, actually, there was a ship, a Portuguese ship that brought individuals, and they were captured and then brought over with the purpose of it. So, it really is, quite a while ago.
Throughout history, there are situations, varying degrees. The history that we're most familiar with, I guess, in the last 3,000 years or so, the degrees of slavery, at least from my perspective, have not endured so much, or the effects of it, as they have in the United States. Right. We saw apartheid in South Africa, but yet, they were able to overcome that, and to what extent they still have situations comparable to the United States, I don't know that. I know that, we're human beings, and so there's never a perfect situation, but there can be a striving to an ideal situation. And one of the things when you talked about the first ship and Pluto in Taurus just made me think, yeah, it's like the beginning of looking at Black people as resources to be used in any way, on a personal level, on any way that one wants to. So, slave owners in the United States could treat them any way they wanted to treat them. That's that personal element of Taurus versus a collective reaction. But then, to have it in the United States chart, when the declaration was made, it was in Capricorn towards the end. We haven't had that return yet. It's coming up, not too distant future. And so, there's that question of, should slavery remain an institution? And we've struggled for over 200 years with that question. Slavery was abolished, but in fact, the treatment of people wasn't. Treat as if they were slaves or disposable items, like personal items that you could easily dispose of.
Well, two things I want to say with that. It's interesting because, where that first slave ship, Pluto is at 9 degrees Taurus, where Uranus is right now. We were talking about that Uranus-Pluto kind of interchange. So here we've got this kind of awakening. And The second, I just lost what the second thought was. Oh, well, we'll let that go then. Go ahead.
You know, the slavery thing is kind of a, a forced migration. And then you talked at the beginning about the diaspora of the Blacks from the South, and that's a chosen migration. And just the thought of migration in general, and I think of it more as a Jupiterian thing, that we as humans, Jupiter and its opposite planet Mercury, both have to do with traveling, with going places, whether locally or long distance. I think it's part of human nature to migrate. I think, you know, and to have arguments against migration is so unhuman, just totally unhuman. There are problems like, you know, I think about
Man,
Sweden.
it's man, it's man, not human. It's man. You know, it's that male determinism, that male thought that it can draw, that you know, here we're talking metaphorically in a sense, but it's that male sense, like, I'm going to draw a line here and this is mine and you can't pass it. Women, I don't think have that kind of it's not an inherent, I mean.
Well, you're talking about it's beyond women, it's the feminine and the masculine, and the feminine is all accommodating.
Right.
That is the ultimate feminine. Some women are that way, but also some men are that way.
Right.
But you know, the masculine may set up barriers and say, well, you know, we've got these structures and they'll only hold so many. I mean, and this is the problem in Scandinavia, especially in Sweden right now, where they let so many migrants in from Syria that it has overwhelmed their economy and their ability to, you know, handle and have a decent living for everybody. And so that kind of migration where people are forced, in this, maybe from a Plutonian perspective, forced because of the evil and the slavery and the dire consequences of staying, to move. But there are times when people have just migrated out of great adventure. And I think of some of the earliest settlers of Northern America and South America. You know, they were adventurers. They were going, let's look for, you know, so there's an upside to this and there's a downside to this, as there is in everything in astrology.
The other thing, and it's not to take away from the slavery trade at all, but what a lot of Americans forget too is that many people were sent here as indentured servants, which is what slavery began as, where, you know, you were beholden to the noble who, you know, owned the, you know, 50,000 acres in Virginia to pay off your bill for getting across the ocean. And then somehow, you know, you broke a teapot and then that ended up costing you another 4 years of your life. And, you know, before you know it, it was a whole lifetime. So, you know, it was really, to be honest, an issue more of class than it really even was of color, I think, in the beginning. And then, you know, I think it was much easier, but, you know, there were white indentured. I know some of my ancestors who were white. Well, also I have some black ancestors as well, but some of my white ancestors who came over as indentured servants back in the 1800s, you know, to pay off their way, and they stayed working in the household until the day they died. I mean, that, you know, before 1900, most people's homes had maids and you know, and house help. It's the only way you can
that went on in South America, Australia, you know,
in the U.S. You talk to your friends before, you know, when you talk to people back before 1900, if you had any kind of means, you had a housekeeper, you had a cook, you had people doing things that really help, that we don't really have as many people doing those sorts of support things, because we have dishwashers, we have washing machines, we have telephones, we have cars, all the time-saving devices of the modern age. And
you know,
in a sense, and this is, in a way, the interesting thing is, as this thing transforms, what we're really working towards, and we've kind of been threading this idea too, the true slavery, or what, and the truest sense of what should be really working are machines. We should be having machines do all the things so that people don't have to. The question is, how do we monetize? How do we take the greed out of these owners of the corporations so that they can create machines that generate products that everyone can have, and everyone can live a good life without having to work and toil and have all these different classes of people? I mean, can we have a society where everyone wants to be? No, I don't think everyone wants to be equal, but what gradation is okay? I think, a limit, I like that there's a guy circulating the idea of, like, when you get to $999,999,000,000, that you the rest of your money over $1 billion, it's given away. It goes to the government, because who really needs to make more than $1 billion a year? What
that's yes, that just creates an ongoing haves and have-nots.
Right, and that's where we are today.
Yeah.
And when people can buy and sell real estate without having to get mortgages, that's what takes away the middle class. When it costs the average person 2 to 3 times what their house costs by the time they're done paying for it, and that's if they keep the original mortgage and don't refinance it every few years because they're just trying to keep up. Meanwhile, people, then the wealthy people are just coming in and go, oh, cash, 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 all, and then everyone's a renter. It's a very interesting absorption of wealth that's been going on in this country.
Well, and also what's interesting too, and this is a Pluto issue, is insurance and interest, which is usury, which, if you go back to the Bible, is really it should be a sin, but nobody thinks about that.
And who gets charged the most? The people who are the poorest. I mean, that's the weirdest thing. I don't know if I know a fair amount of really wealthy people, and then the interesting thing is, the more money you have, the less you pay for things. It's a very interesting dynamic. There's not trickle down like people think. The trickle down is what goes down the leg. That's what's trickling down. And I think people need to get to the point of supporting everyone. I mean, we need to be in a society where everyone has, I don't want to walk through a homeless park to get to my home that has a fence around it. I want to have people, like, walking and feeling comfortable, walking their dogs and talking with their children and playing and feeling great. Why shouldn't everyone on the planet have that right? It makes me very angry, sorry.
You've not struck an argument with me.
I know. I know I'm talking to the choir.
on any of that. And the one thing that struck me in all of what you were just saying is that, and this we know from astrology, is that each of us is unique. That, it's not, we might have a chart like identical twins do that is very similar, but the level of consciousness that we bring, as beings coming from some other realm into this realm and leaving it to something else, we're here with varying degrees of interests, of talents, of abilities, and consequently a one-size-fits-all economy doesn't quite work. But my best solution is what they did on Star Trek.
I mean, there's got to be
money. They gave up money. They gave up money. They eliminated it.
I mean,
and everybody just does what they like doing.
I mean, there's going to have to be at some point where it's not, and I mean, maybe that's what the crypto, I mean, that's a whole different topic, of course, but maybe that's kind of what the cryptocurrency is kind of working towards. But I mean, in a sense, as things become more automated, if we're able to make the world more automated, then, the economy is going to have to switch in such a way, because if people aren't working, there's going to have to be care for those individuals. We can't just.
Well, with this world burning up, and heating up? Do you think that we're going to be able to go all automate? This is where, I think the biggest frustration and anxiety setter of these times is that when you start thinking of the future and then you come back to the present moment, there is not, yes, there is not the kind of certitude that there was a year ago.
No, and that's kind of funny because when you think about it, that last century, the 20th century, when I think about, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. I mean, I've always enjoyed being around older people. It's my Saturn in the fourth house and being an old soul, I think. But I just, there was always such a like, this is how you handle this. This is how you handle this. This like very clear understanding about how you handle things. And now we're in this time where those clear understandings no longer work. Like they talk about this there's a new DNA thing or something they figured that showed up somewhere around the 1400s that kind of coincides with the Renaissance, because there was this understanding that we had to switch from this, that more agrarian thing, and we became more urban. I think, there are a lot of us really, I mean, look at, like, we're on YouTube. Look at all the amazing panoply, the myriad experiences and expressions of beingness on YouTube that, have anywhere. I mean, like ours right now, we have low number count. Hopefully we'll get to a big one, but some of these that are just the most inane thing, and they have like 3 million people following them. And it's like, everyone has a voice. And like what you say, the wonderful thing is like, how do we find these ways of expressing our beautiful, unique archetype? Because the truth is that is exactly what we're here to do. Some of us are here to do it out loud and have other people hear it. Some of us are actually more inward and are having a quiet lifetime. Some of us want to live in home. Some of us don't want to live in home. Some of us want to be involved with societies and groups. Some of us don't want to be, want to be a hermit up in the mountain and just observe it all and write. I mean, how do we find a way for everyone to have a right to be who they are and them to be okay who they are being and be human? That's the great, that's the great experiments. And I think that's why, everything is so unseen right now. The collective is still, I think we're all on a certain level, Neptune and Pisces, we're all, the collective dream is still really dreaming itself. I mean,
So
trying to divine out of muddy waters is not going to really give you a clear idea of what's coming forward.
this is where I go to Jupiter
Yeah.
in astrology, because it's like finding that sense of what is right and what is wrong, finding a sense of ethics. And the thing, though, the problem with that, even, and with Jupiter, is, might say, too much Jupiter, where one is so convinced that they've lit upon the best way for everybody that we end up with the gurus and their cults that, and there are cults that I would label good, and there are cults that I would label not so good. I mean, all religions are cults. And then there are, psychological schools of thought that set up their kinds of cults.
Right.
And there are, I'm not sure, there may be other, there even, you might even think of economic cults, like the haves and the have.
Capitalism, to be honest, because I think it is a cult.
Exactly. Exactly.
Definitely are sacrificing a lot of the altar of capitalism for no apparent reason.
So in all the ethical questions that come up in all of them, one of the things that guides me is whatever comes up that's different from theirs, or that theirs is different from somebody else's, is what we're proposing good for everybody, no matter what cult they belong to or what, group they're labeled as. And that's not always an easy question to answer, because sometimes, in one country we might think, well, this is a good deal, we're getting this water, from the Rio Grande, but what's happening down in Mexico? Are they getting any water? And so it's a very simplistic phrase, but it chunks up to include the many, and that's where it becomes fuzzy.
You know, and I like that you bring Jupiter into the picture because, like when we gave our talk in December last year, I called it a breath of fresh air. You know, Jupiter and Saturn will be joining one another in Aquarius for the first time in 500 years. Some really
20
incredible
years.
in air
Jupiter,
signs.
Saturn is, oh, in air signs. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
we've got to go back to about the 1100s, 1200s, around in there.
yeah, it's like the trigonalis, and it really is a breath of fresh air. And I think, you know, in the sense of Jupiter and Saturn is a level of jurisprudence, is a level of understanding and authority. And in the sign of Aquarius, you know, on one hand, we can get, you know, an amazing dictocrat, right, or dictator from that sense, but we can also get people who are coming together with the understanding of higher ideals that are the best foundations for the collective. And of course, as is always the case with these astrological things, we're going to see both and everything in between. But I'm going to
That
hold
kind
on to
of
that.
that reminds me of last week's when we were talking about the feminine and women's suffrage, and one of the things since we had that talk that keeps flashing back in my head that sometimes I don't address enough, and that's the polarity. You know, talking about Pisces, where Neptune is now as a feminine sign, which, you know, you think of as all embracing, but every sign has the polarity. And so the sign, and the sign that speaks the most about enslavement is Pisces. And consequently, in reflecting on that, since we talked, I thought, well, women have been more enslaved during the Piscean age, but yet there's the struggle to undo that. So there's that kind of push for the positive side of being accommodated in any area of life, that's been fought for, and, you know, has been achieved by some women, but not all yet. You know, so the human struggle.
Yeah, I mean, and again, you know, I think these also, I think for those of us who have a hard time accepting these different aspects, I mean, I think that's what one is the wonderful gift about astrology, because it's learning about that we also have all these different aspects within ourselves. These different, each of the planets has a need for expression. And, you know, as these parts don't get expressed, they build up. I mean, it's like a boil. I mean, we're, you know, what we're dealing with right now in society is kind of like this collective boil that's been building in different aspects. I mean, I think, yeah, for feminine rights, I mean, yeah, 2000 plus years, actually, however long patriarchy has been, you know, wrecking its, you know, slinging its balls all over the place, sorry, but you know, it's like, you know, that's taking the place. And then, you know, all the other subjugation, you know, that male energy that, you know, as identified by Mars, you know, it's an insertive, it takes over things, you know. So it's like, you know, how do we make it, you know, how do, you know, we now can, it goes back to that idea I had earlier about, you know, with instinct, you know, how do we bring reason into that? How do we bring the ability to sit there, understanding the other side of Aries is Libra, you know, not about acting right away, but thinking about it. What is the right thing to do? And that's what we're really needing to step into. And Trump is just such a great example of, you know, what the lack of instinctual control is like, and what that fires up on the planet and in people still. So I mean, it shows that there's a lot of flammable material existing in people's psyche that really still needs to be, you know, cleaned out.
Yeah, I have thought about Trump in a similar vein, in that it's like indicative of um, of a lot of authoritarian energy that comes from a place that really is you know, is not really,
Earned it.
it has no authority,
Right.
and it's twisted, and and it's a sign of a sickness that is prevailing in the American culture. It really is. And he's, I mean, to me, he's just the messenger,
Exactly.
one that I hope we could dispose
Resolve
of soon.
shortly. Anything else on your mind?
Oh my, well,
Or
not at
maybe
this
just wait for
point.
next week.
I think we'll save it for next week and see where it goes. Yes.
How can people find you?
They can find me right here in my, no, sitting at my desk.
Right.
No, I'm available via email at moonwise@ksfr.org, KSFR radio station, public radio here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I do a show. I've been doing it for 20 years. It's 20 plus now, 20 years on KSFR 101.1 FM in Santa Fe, but streaming at ksfr.org. And also you can call me at 505-690-1878. There you go.
Michael Bartlett. You can reach me at michael@coremichael.com or 505-690-3860. My website is coremichael.com. I do readings, talks, experientials. Please, if you like our video, please click the thumbs up button below. Please share with your friends. Please please, what's the other thing I want? Subscribe, that's the other thing, yeah. So thank you so much. May you find some guidance from the planets and help you to understand what you need to do in the coming weeks. And we're all in this together, try and find ways to be as compassionate and loving as possible. And many blessings to you all. Bye.
All right, bye.